That's the beginning. It hasn't been consummated. I believe that's the more proper context for us to see what Hymenaeus and Philetus could appeal to and to say, hey, it's already passed. It's a done deal. And Paul could say, well, we did die with it. Again, Colossians chapter 3. If then you died with Christ, seek those things which are at the right hand of God, or which are in heaven, where Christ sits at the right hand of God, or Christ who is our life. So you see, death, life, etc., etc. So, seen in that context, I believe that Hymenaeus and Philetus acknowledged and understood resurrection was a spiritual reality, having nothing to do with biological bodies coming out of a grave. But they claimed that it was a done deal, when it was not a done deal when Paul wrote.
One of the issues, and as I alluded to in the very beginning of the broadcast, the two big points that I look at, Don, on this, and obviously, as you said, there are many, but timing and nature. You know, from the traditional view of resurrection that you and I grew up with, the idea that at some point in time, the bones are going to come out of the grave, and then that's the, quote, resurrection that everybody was waiting for. And if that was the issue, then couldn't Paul have easily said to Philetus and Hymenaeus, gee, guys, the bones are still in the grave?
And pardon me, that's exactly the point that I was trying to raise a moment ago when I said, how could Philetus and Hymenaeus convince anybody that the resurrection had occurred if the resurrection is the time when all of the physical human bones and, you know, rotten flesh or whatever comes out of the grave? They simply could not convince anyone that that cataclysmic, time-ending, earth-burning, grave-emptying event had already taken place. All that Paul had to do, and by the way, this is important in regard to a hermeneutical principle. When Paul addressed error, Paul normally, my phrase for it is, Paul went for the jugular vein. He knocked the props out from under his opponents and those with whom he is having controversy. He went right straight for the key fundamental issue that was at stake. We see that in 1 Corinthians 15 when Paul says concerning those who were saying that some, that is the dead ones, in the passage, which I believe happens to be Old Covenant Israel, were not going to be resurrected. And Paul says, if the dead ones are not raised, then Christ is not raised. Well, you see, they believed, these people who were denying resurrection life to the dead ones, believed in the resurrection of Jesus. So Paul, my point is, Paul is going for the jugular. He is using things that they accept, things that they believe, in order to make his point and to devastate their position. With that kind of hermeneutic, with that kind of approach, think about what it is that Paul actually says in 2 Timothy chapter 2. The point that you made, to me, is so incredibly powerful. Couldn't Paul, if Paul agreed with Hymenaeus and Philetus, he agreed with them that the resurrection is an earth-burning, time-ending event in which all of the physical bodies are raised out of the ground, reconstituted and revived and restored. And Hymenaeus and Philetus said it's already happened. Then why in the world did Paul, why did he not say, excuse me guys, you know what? The graves are still there. They're not empty. But you see, evidently Paul and Philetus and Hymenaeus did, as a matter of fact, agree on the nature. The only thing they disagreed about was the timing.
Isn't it interesting, Don, that, you know, as you've stated and I've stated so many times, God works from the natural to the spiritual, but yet, in the case of many people today, unwittingly, they want to go from the natural back to the natural.
John, I've made that point. It's such a wonderful point. I'm so glad that you brought it up. It is generally argued, well, certainly, Christians are raised from the dead, the death of sin. We are raised spiritually with Christ, but we're waiting the physical resurrection at the end of time. Well, excuse me. The principle that you just enunciated, which is taken directly from Paul's inspired words, 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 46. God's modus operandi, God's method of operation, has invariably, okay, we're not talking occasionally, once in a great while, But what we are saying is that God has invariably operated from the natural, from the material, then to the spiritual.
It's fascinating to me because, as you're pointing out in 1 Corinthians 15, I thought it would be interesting here to start at the 44th verse and just kind of lay it out for people, and we could walk them through it. He says, "It is sown a natural body, it is raised a spiritual body. There is a natural body, and there is a spiritual body. And so it is written, the first Adam was made a living soul, the last Adam was made a quickening or life-giving spirit. However, that was not first which is spiritual, but that which is natural, and afterwards that which is spiritual. The first man is of the earth earthly, the second man is the Lord from heaven. As we have borne the image of the earthly," verse 49, "we shall also bear the image of the heavenly." Isn't this remarkable that this point is so dramatically missed in this whole charge?
Well, I think it is. It's not only remarkable, John, it's absolutely tragic. The idea that man must get the physical, biological body out of the grave. Now, and of course, right here, John, right here's the crux of the matter in which our opponents call us heretics, because they believe so firmly in the physical body coming out of the grave that when they hear us say that it's not a biological reconstitution, all of a sudden the red flags go up with them. They do not understand that we're saying that Paul taught a spiritual resurrection. And that is his emphatic doctrine in 1 Corinthians chapter 15. It is sown natural, it is raised spiritual. Now, there's all sorts of controversy in that passage, even among preterists. What is that body? Is it the human body that's sown into the ground, physically resurrected on the other side of death, et cetera, with an immortal body? Okay? I do not believe that's what Paul's talking about in that particular passage. I believe he's talking about the body of Old Covenant Israel that he establishes very early on as Jesus is the first fruits of Old Covenant Israel in her resurrected life and fellowship to God. But whichever it is, it really doesn't matter. Paul is without any doubt whatsoever discussing a spiritual resurrection, not a physical resurrection. And to miss that point, I'm sitting here looking at a whole row of books, and it's on John chapter 5, as I read these books, these commentaries on John chapter 5, starting with verse 24 through 29, invariably, John, they state, well, in verse 24 and 25, Jesus said, "The hour is coming and now is, in which those who hear the voice of the Son of Man will live, and those who believe have passed from death unto life." See, spiritual resurrection, but we're waiting for the physical resurrection. Where do you have the right to change horses in the middle of the stream like that?
Yeah, it's a good question, Don, but it seems, though, that us humans are really attached to this physical, even to the point we want to get these old bones back. And the thing is, when we go back to the Garden of Eden, God said to Adam, "From dust you are, and dust you will return," and not one hint of a reference that he was going to reconstitute that body again.
Well, take a look at what even Solomon said in Ecclesiastes, that famous passage, in regard to man. The body returns to the dust from whence it came, and the soul goes to God who gave it. That's just pretty clear. There are all sorts of questions about it, obviously, but it tells about the fate of the human body, and it talks about at least the potential fate of the, quote, soul, unquote. And the Lord is the one who gives eternal life. He's the one that gives us life. So this entire issue is one in which the traditions, and I use that word tradition in a sense that is totally neutral, okay? I'm not trying to be negative, but I am saying that the tradition of Christianity down through the years has so altered and changed what the Bible really has to say about resurrection life that it's almost unrecognizable when we compare what is being said by the major theologians of the day and what the Bible actually says.
But Don, isn't the basic problem, though, once again, is that we are so earthly minded, if you will, that our points of understanding have to relate here somehow. And I think this is one of the biggest problems. I know I grew up with it. Even the graveyards around here, and I'm sure it's probably this way in your part of the world, Don, that people are even actually buried, if you will, facing east, waiting for that resurrection.
Absolutely, no doubt about it whatsoever, John, because after all, the doctrine of resurrection says Christ is going to come from the east